What's a rule your parents had that you now realize was totally bizarre? Story 1. My dad told me that when he was done eating, I was also done eating. So if I wanted to eat what I wanted, was always very, very hungry despite being well fed, I had to scarf it down fast. In recent years, I've managed to train myself to eat slower, but it's still a conscious thing I have to focus on. Answer: I never will understand forcing a kid to eat quickly. I am a notoriously slow eater. My wife is not shoveling food in, but will finish well before me kind of slow. It has helped me portion size, and I have a fairly respectable understanding of how much I can eat. Also, I get to enjoy my food and how it tastes. I didn't realize it until high school when I would frequently eat at a buddy's house, and their mom had a rule of no thirds until everyone had seconds. They had 3 large teenage boys who ate like they were in a competition, and they would stare down while waiting for thirds, and I was sitting there not done with my first portion. Story 2. To this day, my mother has at least 4 chairs around the house you are not allowed to sit on. They are neither beautiful nor special in any way. They just exist and eat space. You can't even put your jacket there, as I learned last visit. Edit. Thank you guys for the awesome replies. I didn't know that those not for sitting you lil fudge chairs were a thing so common. Also, the Gutastube seems to be an international thing. Had some good laughs, thanks. Answer: my wife's grandma is a woman I love dearly, and she's the sweetest lady there is. She's also very, very religious. The first time I met her was on Christmas when my wife and I were dating. We drove to her house a few hours away and stayed there for the holiday. First night, we're sitting in the living room, and I notice a dining chair with a decorative sleeve over the back of it. It seemed significant, so I asked, "Hey, Grandma, what's special about that chair?" I noticed the cool sleeve on there. She kinda cheerfully goes, "Oh well, during Christmas time, that's a chair for Jesus." At this point, it's important to know that I had heard Grandma was religious, but I didn't know the extent. I'm not about to judge what someone believes or does in their own house. And TBH, I thought it was a nice gesture to set aside a space for the big man on his birthday. So I say, "Oh cool, so nobody sits there?" Her face gets super serious. She looks me dead in the eye and says, "No, Jesus sits there." The mood had definitely shifted at that point, and nobody says anything. I look around to my wife for help, and she's desperately trying to contain her laughter. I try to recover and say something like, "Oh, that's really great," until someone finally changes the subject. Story 3. No early bedtimes, unless for punishments, no sleeping in at all, and no naps. Took a 3-hour nap on the first day I moved into my apartment and slept in until 8 the next day. It was fabulous. Also, not allowed to be in your room during the day. I purposely would get into trouble so I could sit in my room and read. Story 4. I had to drink a huge glass of milk every morning as a kid because my parents believed it would make me grow tall. But I was lactose intolerant, so it just ended up making me feel really nauseous, and it wrecked my digestion. Yet they still forced me and my little brother to drink it. Answer: in a similar food-related motif, my mother has a revisionist memory too. Ever since I was a child, I have absolutely disliked marinara sauce. Thus, I don't really eat much Italian food. I don't know what it is. The combo of cooked tomatoes and oregano, maybe? Whatever it is, I can't stand marinara or anything similar. Alfredo? Fine. Pesto? Sure. Marinara? Not a chance in hell I'll eat it. But every single time I visit my parents, my mother has made something Italian and covered in marinara. Spaghetti, lasagna, manicotti, whatever. And every time, she starts with, "I knew you were coming, so I made your favorite." No, woman, it's not my favorite. It's yours. She would eat nothing but Italian food for every meal, every day, and be happy as a clam. So, because she likes it, she assumes everyone does. 40 years on this earth, and my own mother can't remember the solitary food item that I refused to eat. Story 5. My parents were really religious when I was growing up. Strangely enough, they aren't anymore. My dad had a rule that we could only listen to Christian music. It was fine by me because I didn't have an iPod or a CD player anyway. One day I was in the kitchen, though, and my dad started singing, "I'm like a bird, LOL," while he was cooking breakfast. I was like, Daddy, that isn't a Christian song. And he said, "Yeah, but it's Nelly. Of course you can listen to Nelly. She's a classic." That story is so random it makes me laugh whenever I remember it. Story 6. I wasn't allowed to watch anything that depicted a dysfunctional family in case I started to realize that was us. LMFAO. Answer: I was barely allowed to socialize as a child in case I would realize what a functioning family should be like, and in case they had nicer things than we did. I wasn't allowed to have any friends over ever or have a birthday party because in my mother's mind, the house and our possessions weren't good enough. There was absolutely nothing wrong with them. She was just a weird snob. I was bullied senseless at school for being aloof because of this, and I'm still socially troubled to this day. I have a complex about visitors, and I freak out if someone's coming over because I have no idea how to be a host. Story 7. When I was a kid, I couldn't have friends unless their parents smoked pot. My mom's only hobby was plant substance, still is, and she was super paranoid that it'd bring a friend over who would notice the plant substance and get her in trouble, or if it'd tell the wrong kid who'd tell their parents and she'd get caught. Like, why is it the job of a 7-year-old to ask random kids if their parents smoke pot, and to be careful just who to ask? I just ended up with 0 friends. Story 8. Don't use the decorative towel rack. It's for company. There was one decorative towel on it with an embroidered cardinal. We had one bath towel rack, but a family of 5 had to use that one bathroom. Answer. Grew up in an older house without room for decorative towels and soaps, and a mom who thought it was all extra work anyway. High school girlfriend lived in a house her mom kept in. Nobody actually lives here. Museum perfection, complete with decorative soap and towels. There was an obviously functional soap dispenser, but no functional towels. Her mom bitched up a storm at me. Story 9. My parents gave me a ridiculously early bedtime for a preteen. It would still be daylight in the summer and I'd have to go to bed at 7 p.m. The sun wasn't going to set for a long time yet. Wide awake, I'd sit at my window for the next few hours watching my brother and the neighbor kids playing outside. It took forever for me to get tired. It really sucked. Answer. I have memories of this, and I still only sleep an average of 7 hours or less. This is where my maladaptive daydreaming came from, and my tendency to be incredibly quiet while I do things. Eventually, I learned how to sneak out of my room for the night, and my sleep schedule was well and truly borked for the next decade, as I got in the habit of only really living after midnight. Story 10. I was not allowed to listen to any music that you could hear any sort of percussion or what my parents would call a beat. That doesn't really make sense though because every song has a beat. But like no drums in any sort of rock, pop, CCM, rap, jazz, well basically, majority of music genres were off the table. There also wasn't allowed to be any slurring, as they called it. No riffs were allowed. No singing unless it almost sounded operatic. I love to sing, but as a kid, I was constantly being yelled at for not singing right. I was basically only allowed to listen to certain instrumental artists and like 10 vocal music artists, who by the way also believed in the same rules. Although even a few of those started going off the deep end, and we had to monitor what music, if theirs, we were allowed to listen to. Answer. Was it a religious thing? I'm just curious because that is definitely unusual. I used to volunteer in the food pantry at a Mennonite church, despite not being Christian, much less Mennonite. So take my recollections with a grain of salt. And IIRC, they've got a big thing about only using human voices, not instruments, to create music in church. The congregation I volunteered with was very liberal and mostly seemed to not hold to that outside church. But I think some more conservative traditional congregations might. So that's what it reminded me of. Story 11. My parents absolutely forbade me from getting my hair cut, not even a little bit. I was 16 when I was finally allowed to get a trim. I remember telling the hairdresser to cut it below my shoulders, and my mom stood behind me and pointed to my lower back instead. Yes, the hairdresser listened to my mom instead of me. It wasn't a weird religious thing or anything. They just insisted my hair was so pretty, and it would absolutely break their hearts to get it cut. Answer. I got suspended from school for 10 days in the 8th grade because I cut a girl's braid off. But what none of the adults knew is that we planned it, and I was willing to get in trouble for my friend. Her parents were weirdly religious. Girls could never cut their hair and had to wear skirts, and a ton of other rules. My friend had thick curly hair and she was allowed to wear it down, up in a bun or a single braid. When it was down, she had to move her hair to sit down so she wouldn't sit on it. The thing is, though, she'd get headaches because her hair was so heavy, and she also disliked having long hair. So, we made a plan. She braided her hair and I brought scissors to school and cut her hair to bra strap length during class because I sat right behind her. Best school suspension ever. Totally worth it. Story 12. Grandma had a counter space in the kitchen. We are not allowed to put anything on it, or that dish or item would be thrown away. Or even if we touch that counter, we have to wash our hands thoroughly. Found out years later, My grandma has really bad delusions and associates things with passing. When she got a call that someone died, she was touching that very counter. Story 13. My mom would say no to me having fun multiple times a week. Let's say I went to Tiffany's house on Friday. Then Chelsea invited me to her house Saturday. Nope, can't go because I went to Tiffany's yesterday. Would all my homework and chores be done before I asked? Yes. Was there some sort of family plans or literally anything else that I had to do? Nope, just had to stay home because I had fun the day before, and I'm not allowed to have fun more than one day a week. Then my parents wondered why I started sneaking out as a teen. Story 14. My sister and I were only allowed to use 2 squares of TP for 1 and 3 squares for 2. We cried for extra TP when we started getting our periods. Story 15. My mom used to make my brother and I wash every wall in the house over and over, even when they were spotlessly clean. When we bring this up now, she gets immediately and extremely angry and refuses to say anything about it. Story 16. No sleeping in during weekends. At the time, it felt unfair, but now I see how strange it was to never let kids rest. Answer. It was expected to never sleep past 8 a.m. in my house. You were supposed to be up and ready to do chores or start the day productive in some way. I had troubles with sleeping and energy in general. Still do. So I struggled in my daily life unless I managed to get a nap in the afternoon. I cherished the days off from school because I could sleep in as late as I wanted, guilt-free, and without my parents bursting into my room with a vacuum running to loudly announce I was being lazy. Story 17. Grew up in a middle-class neighborhood. Our house had a 1-car garage full of my dad's stuff, so no one parked in there. I had a car that I bought with my own money when I was old enough to drive, earned the money at my PT job. Both my parents had their own car. My dad insisted that he was the only one that was allowed to park in the driveway. Not me, not my mother. Yes, he was a huge jerk. We were to park in the street. I parked in the driveway, and one day he parked me in and refused to move his car when I had to go to work. I grabbed my car keys and drove across the lawn to get out. I was 16 at the time and 45 now. I still remind that old jerk of that and laugh my head off. Story 18. I could go out at 7 p.m. and be out for 5 hours until midnight, but I couldn't go out at 10 p.m. and only be out for 2 hours. Going out at 10 p.m. was too late. Yeah, something dangerous happens between our house and my destination at 10 p.m. But if I'm already gallivanting all over town at 10 p.m., it's much safer. Answer. Honestly, this one makes a lot of sense to me. As an adult, I morph into an entirely different person between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. At 7 p.m., I still have energy and optimism, and I imagine I'd be mentally prepared to do a late-night pickup or deal with an emergency. At 10 p.m., I am not leaving the house unless it's on fire, and I'm certainly not spending the next 2 hours worrying about what a kid is up to. Story 19. I wasn't allowed to use the internet in any way, shape, or form before 1 p.m. on Sundays. I realized in my teenage years that this was because we had stopped going to church, but my parents didn't want my friends to know, and by extension, my friends' parents. We weren't in church on Sunday morning. Story 20. Beds had to be made each morning and had to remain perfect until bedtime. If I wanted to have an afternoon nap on the weekends, then I was allowed to take the pillow from the bed to sleep on the floor, but the pillow had to go back perfectly afterwards. Story 21. My stepmother had a rule that unmarried people couldn't share a bed in her house. My long-term girlfriend, whom I shared a bed in an apartment, had to sleep in a separate room. One Christmas, her brother stayed over with his new girlfriend, and she tried it on him. He just said, "Ha, no, that's not happening," and they went to the guest bedroom. Then I got married, and we went to visit my parents for Christmas. She tried to get us to sleep in separate rooms, and I stared at her for a moment before I said, "No, I'm going to sleep in the same bed as my wife. Thank you very much." She was fuming as her brain tried to come up with some reason why this couldn't happen. I could see her clenching her jaw before she finally gritted out, "Right, yes, of course." She looked like she swallowed a bug. Story 22. Garbage night is Wednesday night. If Dad takes out the garbage, no more garbage for the night. Hold on to your garbage until morning and then throw it in the trash can. My paternal grandfather. Kitchen garbage can is only for wrapping and tissues. All food scraps must go in the plastic grocery store sack by the sink. Don't you dare not put the recycling in the box by the door. He would also rummage the garbage can and make sure his garbage rules were followed. Story 23. My mom allowed me to watch incredibly violent movies from a very early age, but God forbid there was a kissing scene. I couldn't watch anyone kissing or lightly touching each other with her until I was at least 17. Story 24. While visiting a friend's house, I used their restroom, and the TP roll was empty. On the back of the commode was a crocheted duck with roll of toilet paper underneath. I took the toilet paper from that duck and added it to the TP spindle, and propped up the empty duck as well as possible. Story 25. My mom was and still is a massive health nut. The main thing I remember about childhood was that she never allowed us to eat white bread. She said it had so much sugar it was basically cake, and that only wheat bread was really bread. I fudge dislike wheat bread now though, and never eat it, so I guess that backfired on her. Answer. My parents only had wheat bread when I was growing up. My mom recounts the story when I was probably 10 or 11. I was hanging out at a friend's house, and his mom made sandwiches for us. I apparently liked the sandwich so much I told my friend's mom that she has to give my mom the recipe because the sandwich is amazing. Turns out it was bologna with pepper jack cheese on white bread. Interesting enough, I don't really like white bread as an adult, and will often pick wheat when possible. I think because for the first 20 years of my life, I, mostly, only ever knew wheat bread. I, of course, usually only buy wheat bread for my kids, and I wonder what this will do to them when they are adults. Story 26. I wasn't allowed to bleach my hair, but I was allowed to color it darker if I wanted to. My identical twin sister wasn't allowed to color her hair darker, but was allowed to bleach it. I desperately wanted to be bottle blonde, and my twin wanted black hair. We got neither and stayed identically brunettes. Also not really a rule, but my mom would act like it was the best day ever whenever we got ourselves hurt as kids. Not really in an abusive or suspect way or anything. I think she just decided to go hard on the Pavlovian conditioning so she wouldn't have to do anything whenever we got scrapes or cuts. Going all out on the cheer and commenting how cool it looked, how lucky we were to get such a cool scrape burn bruise, etc., and getting us candy. Worked like a dream too, if memory serves me correctly. Remember getting so excited to show my mom the scrapes on my cheek after face planting off my bike. Probably not that bizarre, but some old friends found the enthusiasm unsettling, so. Answer. I wanted to dye my hair when I was younger, but my mom wouldn't let me. I scoured the internet to find some way I could change my hair because I didn't have money to buy hair dye myself. Eventually, I figured out that I could use peroxide and baking soda to lighten my hair. Bye-bye, black hair. After I did that, finally my mom let me dye my hair. She even did her own hair too. Long story short, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. Story 27. We were strongly encouraged not to say words like fart or booger. Note my family was not unwilling to talk about bodily functions. Like, the word female body part, if used in a relevant context, was fine. Similarly, we didn't call our parents mommy or daddy, even when we were very young. Mom and dad. I think my parents just believed so firmly in helping develop literacy by talking to kids as if they're just short adults, that they had an almost pathological avoidance of any word that could be construed as childish. Answer. When my 10-year-old calls me mommy, he's too cool for that these days, is when I know he's either getting sick or feeling super emotional and needs some snuggles but doesn't want to ask for them. That's when a book comes out, and I suggest we sit close on the couch for a chapter or two. By the end of the first chapter, he's snuggled up to me and ready to talk usually. Or he's falling asleep if he's getting sick, and I should cancel everything for the next day or two. Story 28. Whenever my dad filled up the car, he'd always note down the quantity of fuel bought, the price, and the mileage on the odometer, and then enter it into a spreadsheet so he could keep track of the car's fuel efficiency. And he always insisted I did the same. Story 29. Not being able to go out in high school because they were going out and I had to babysit my siblings. Story 30. Not my parents, but my aunt. No drinks allowed during a meal. Otherwise, you get full too early. Yep, we were not even allowed to drink water. Only after the meal you were allowed to drink water or whatever. Story 31. Growing up as the only person in my immediate family with blue eyes, everybody else had brown eyes. I was not allowed to ever wear green because my mom had decided that blue and green were bad together. When I was old enough to choose my own clothes, I had a green period. Green jacket, sweaters, tops, even green socks, lol. Plot twist. My eyes are blue, but right around the iris they're actually green, so wearing green brings out the green in my eyes. Joke's on you, Mom. Story 32. I had to call my mom every 15 to 30 minutes to check in while I was out with friends. The problem was I had a second-hand iPhone whose battery would die after being off the charger for 20 minutes. My mom knew this and didn't care, so I saved her cell and the house phone numbers in all my friends' phones. It also didn't help that she rarely answered the house phone, so I always had to leave a message because trying her cell would not work, as the service was so shoo where I lived. When I turned 17, and called to check in like usual, she started asking why I was calling. I guess 17 was the randomly picked age where I didn't have to check in anymore. Story 33. Not me, my husband. We were all talking about our parents at my sister's house one evening, and he said they had punishment food. When he said it, it was something like, yeah, the punishment food was always so terrible. Like everyone had punishment food. Like, surely we all had that, and it was a totally normal thing. He was surprised when we all said, punishment food? Yeah, you know, when you were grounded. And every night that you were grounded, you had to have only the punishment food for dinner. For him and his siblings, it was always liver and onions. His sister was grounded for a month, and that was all she was allowed to eat that whole month. She refused, so he and his brother would sneak her food from their plates so she wouldn't starve. They all three lost weight and were playing a constant game of, how many bites of this food can I smuggle into my lap napkin before mom notices? I mean, I'd rather have had that than the physical and emotional abuse my sister and I went through, but it's totally not normal. Story 34. Don't keep the refrigerator door open while you're looking for something. You're letting out all the cold. Now, I know that the thermal mass of the air is dwarfed by the thermal mass of the food, and spending an extra minute looking isn't doing any real harm at all. Story 35. When my sister had a friend over after school or something, and it was time for dinner, our mom would make her friend sit in the other room while we ate. Would not ever offer to let her friend join us or allow the TV on or anything. Just made the friend sit there and be quiet while we ate. Apparently it was family time only. Story 36. That the Indians will kidnap and eat your organs. Yay, took me 15 years to find out my parents are pure racist. Story 37. Lived with a Muslim father. Every fudge time I went to a friend's birthday party, or whenever I'd go somewhere with friends, I had to go through my father's interrogation. This continued until I left home to be in student dorms, and still had to be home for the weekends. It'd be like, with who? What time? Where? What will you be doing? And I was absolutely sick of it. Instead of being like, cool, have fun, this man wanted me to be home whenever I wasn't on campus. Oh, and in most cases, I had to be dropped off and picked up by my mom, who was supportive of me having friends, so I'd often get her help with creating little white lies regarding boyfriends and stuff. I wasn't allowed to be in relationships. Needless to say, I became an excellent liar. Story 38. No singing at the table. I have 3 siblings, and apparently we had a habit of singing at the dinner table. Then, when one of us got a lyric wrong, someone else would try to correct it, leading to a fight. Story 39. I wasn't allowed to wear pink pants because my mom said they made boys think of flesh. Even as a kid, I knew that was weird as hell. Story 40. If we stayed home sick from school, we were not allowed to use the computer. It was like being punished for being sick. Guess what my dad, when he stayed home sick from work, spent the entire day on the computer? Answer. We weren't allowed to do anything if we stayed home. Mom's reasoning was, if you're sick enough to stay home, you need to stay in bed and rest. So no TV, no reading, just sleep. Once when I was sick, she came in to find me with nose in a book. She said, get up, get dressed. Then Mom drove me to school, where I had to explain to the secretary why I was so late arriving. They just sent me on to class. LOL. Story 41. Not really a rule, but my mom was super strict about our curfews in high school. The problem was the curfew was 9 p.m., and my sister and I didn't have a car. In order to be home before curfew, we had to depend on a friend to leave early to take us home, since my mom refused to pick us up. She finally agreed to raise the curfew to midnight. The first time out after that, my sister and I got home at 11:45 p.m., and we got in trouble for pushing it too close to curfew. We literally couldn't win. LMAO. Answer. My parents had a rule that I couldn't ride in cars with friends until I myself became 16 and was driving. Problem was, I was the youngest in my grade by 1-2 years due to a late birthday, so many kids having been held back a grade. Kicker was, she had a rule where she would only drive me one way. The other parent was expected to drive us the other way. Well, when all your friends are driving, they're not going to leave their car at home in favor of riding with our parents. So, I sat at home most weekends for a solid year. Story 42. Story 1. No nail polish, no ice cream, and no singing on the stairs during Lent. I quoted Matthew 6:16 at my mom one year, and she lost it. Note, Step 1, get your kids to be Bible literate. Step 2, complain about your kids holding you to your own religion's standard. LOL. My parents ate, drank, and did whatever the fudge they liked during Lent, but my mom took it as an opportunity to shame us whenever she felt we were too happy or lively. I always knew it was dumb, but only when I was around 21 I realized how messed up it was. I'm still Catholic, but she taught me an excellent lesson on bigotry, and I try my best to check myself. Story 2. Not an explicit rule per se, but my dad disliked and ridiculed jogging to the point that I didn't dare to admit to him that I had taken up running as a hobby. So you could say it was a rule that members of our family didn't run. On the other hand, he often bragged about how good he was at track and field long-distance runs in his youth and admired the professional athletes in these categories. I ran my first organized 5K this year and finally came clean to him about my hobby and told him I beat my PB at 8 months PP, which he congratulated me for. I asked him about his contempt for runners, and he said he didn't mean it like that. So bottom line, super Catholic family accepted in a heartbeat. I married a Jew, but running? Still iffy. Story 43. My mom, who had multiple untreated mental health conditions and childhood trauma, couldn't deal with my being a severely underweight 6-year-old when I started grade school in 1963. I think she had some sort of breakdown and became irrationally obsessed with fattening me as much as possible. By the time I was allowed to go into the living room and lay down on my side on a blanket to watch TV, I could barely take shallow breaths and was afraid that I was going to burst. As a result of this forced gluttony, my weight went from 45 pounds to 195 pounds during my 2nd grade, and for the remainder of my grade school, I was the fattest kid in the entire school, eventually gaining 200 more pounds before the end of the 6th grade. Story 44. My dad made me have a curfew of 6 p.m. My brother could stay out however long. Even during prom, he tried arguing that I had a curfew, even when I reminded him prom started at 6:30. He also didn't like me choosing my prom dress. He posted a photo on Facebook of this white prom dress that he thought was cute. All his friends called him and asked if they needed to take me prom dress shopping. They even asked if it was supposed to come with a chastity belt. Only reason I found out is one of his friends asked me about my dress and made sure my dad didn't choose it. I did ended up picking my own dress. Story 45. Spend all money you want during a school trip, but you have to give the rest back. Broke my and my sister's relationship with money for life, almost. I started saving and investing at 38. Why save if it can disappear any moment? I understand today that it stemmed from my mother's control tendencies. She really did not want us to have our own money we don't have to beg for. Answer. I also grew up like this, but it usually was barely enough to get through the activity to begin with. She'd then search me and treat me with skepticism when I didn't have any change left over, or I had to borrow $1 or $2 from a friend in order to make ends meet, i.e., it'd go to the movies and she'd give me exact change for a ticket and like 10 for a fast food dinner or popcorn. Well, let's say a meal, even back then, $8.99 plus tax. Total came to $10.35. It'd borrow 35 cents from a friend. It'd then come home and she'd search all my pockets and my purse and accuse me of stealing from her or buying substances because how come there's nothing left over? My parents were wealthy too. This wasn't a poverty thing, it was all control. Story 46. No TV channels other than PBS Kids. We had other channels, just weren't allowed to watch them. We also weren't allowed to watch Disney movies. Answer. I had a friend whose parents were very religious, and his dad was particular about things they were and were not allowed to watch. He and his siblings had recorded one of the Ninja Turtles movies on VHS, and Dad decided that he didn't like Splinter because he thought he looked demonic, so they could either throw out the entire tape or erase all the scenes with the rat. So they went through and erased like half the movie. Story 47. I was never, ever allowed to shower if I was home alone. Even when I was 18, 19 and living there. I had to keep the bathroom door unlocked, and my mom would knock on the door every 5 minutes. And if I didn't answer, she would barge in thinking I had slipped and died or something. Story 48. Adventure Time is banned because it's too satanic. Lucifer and Supernatural? That's fine though. If you're curious, yes, my mom was one of the people who thought Pokemon was satanic when Pokemania happened. Story 49. Every single day, our suburban backyard vegetable garden had to be watered. It didn't matter the weather, storming, downpours, and there I'd be, outside with an umbrella and a bucket of water to water the tomatoes. Make it make sense. Story 50. Not my parents, but my grandfather. On food. Take what you want, but eat what you take. He was a World War II veteran, and food was a luxury many times when he was on tour. It all made sense. However, there would be the occasion where I would get something and not like it. Family picnic, new restaurant, etc. And it wasn't an option to leave it or toss it or return it. So, I learned at a young age to make sure I knew what I was getting and not waste anything. Story 51. I was successful at defeating a really bizarre rule once. My mom came up with a chore rota. I would vacuum the kitchen on Monday. My brother would vacuum the kids' room on Tuesday. She would vacuum her bedroom on Wednesday. Dad would vacuum the parental bedroom on Thursday. And there would be a rotating responsibility for vacuuming the bathroom on Friday. I pointed out that would mean that someone would be vacuuming every day of the week, mostly when we were trying to relax and watch TV, before or after dinner. Dad stepped in at that point and gently quashed it. This would have been when I was 5 or 6. It's puzzling how she didn't see how odd this would have been. Story 52. No video games at home. This was an era when everyone had Game Boys except my sister and I. We could get computer games on a shared desktop PC. We could play video games at friends' houses, but we didn't have any consoles or handhelds. Like, even in hindsight, it doesn't seem abusive or bizarre the way a lot of these stories are. But man, was it ostracizing as a kid. Story 53. That you have to wait a half hour before you get into the swimming pool, or you'll have cramps and drown after eating. Story 54. Not being allowed to cry in front of anyone, unless it was an actual legitimate physical injury, i.e., broken bone. Story 55. If you don't eat it, you'll wear it. Enforced by our father when we, my twin and I, were about 4 or 5, and therefore not choosing the type amount of food on our plates. Ended when we were like 6, 8, and our mother got sick of cleaning up the food that would fall on the floor when he would dump our plates over our heads as punishment. Normally, I don't vent about my childhood in Reddit comment sections, but this will get drowned out by the more on-topic, light-hearted posts, so... Story 56. Story 59. My grandmother had this beautiful living room with white wool carpet that we were never allowed in. Right in the middle was a piano, which was never played. It was a trap. After my grandfather passed and the family had gone to the funeral, my grandmother led everyone into the living room where they had coffee. I have an uncle who was in his 40s at the time. He had grown up in that house, and this was the first time he had ever been allowed in the living room. The house was sold shortly after. Story 60. Not being allowed to meet friends, especially going to their homes. Later, I realized that our family wasn't normal, was abusive physically and emotionally, but I always thought that's life, because by not allowing me to visit other family dynamics, I never had something to compare, and I always let the abuse happen, because I thought it was normal while not having the chance of comparison. Story 61. I'm not sure if this counts as bizarre, but my dad and his family would only ever let my sister and I have water at meals, because otherwise we'd fill up on the drink and not eat our food, according to them. I remember not even touching the water some nights because I was so scared of filling up on it and not clearing my plate like they expected us to do. Story 62. You had to go to church on Sunday. We went to church 5 days a week before school. On Sunday, you have to stay home for family day. I don't know why. She didn't even like us. Story 63. I think that they had no rules at all. Gen X ran the streets at all hours. If I didn't come home at all, they would just assume I spent the night with a friend, or they wouldn't notice, LOL. Story 64. My brother. I could not go swimming if we drank water milk too close together. Our mother said that combination would give us cramps, we'd drown. I can't remember how long we had to wait, whether it was 20 minutes or 2 hours. I remember telling my friends because I was really worried they would drown. Story 65. I wasn't allowed to act like a kid. You know kids, they play, run, jump, scream, laugh, cry. That got you the belt in my house. Acting up in public, you got smacked in the store, jerk whooped in the parking lot, and the belt at home. Table manners were paramount. For a blue-collar guy from a blue-collar family, I have shockingly in-depth knowledge of table manners, proper use of silverware, and the different types. Also, if you spoke out of turn at the table, you had to get up and walk over to my father so he could slap you across the face full force, return to your seat, and find your meal. No reaction was permitted. As an adult, I struggled to attend things like kids' birthday parties or a family-friendly restaurant with rowdy or misbehaving kids. The overwhelming urge comes to start swinging and teach these kids discipline. Also, I struggle with not reacting to other adults with no table manners. Story 66. Not talking to strangers. How else am I supposed to make friends? Isn't everyone a stranger at first? LOL. Story 67. We weren't allowed to walk from the bathroom to our bedrooms after a shower in just a towel, even if no one else was there besides family. And our houses were always small, so it may have only been one door over. Still no. My family was really modest. I guess that's where it came from. As an adult, I definitely am not and have no problem with nudity, but I still take my clothes into the bathroom to change out of habit. Story 68. Under no circumstances were we allowed to connect our games console up to the living room TV, even if we did it whilst my mom was out and it was back in my brother's bedroom by the time she was home. If she found out, she freaked out. Story 69. Only 2 phone calls a night of 15 minutes each. Could only go out one night a weekend, not both. Insanely early curfew, too. No new friends allowed to visit the house. Story 70. I was only allowed to wear clear nail polish growing up. It made me so mad. Of course, the idiots didn't tell me that it was a rule from the acting modeling school that they forced me to go to. The other girls at elementary school are allowed to paint their nails. You're not. We're the bosses. End of story. Story 71. My dad always muted the TV during commercials, and that was the only time anyone could talk while we were watching any program, but especially the news. Story 72. That you weren't allowed to eat or drink anything else, except water, for 1 hour, either side of soup. I'd never really challenged this as a child, and as a young adult I didn't really eat, drink, soup. But when I eventually thought about this again, I realized it was crazy and asked my mom why she'd said that. She said, I don't know really. It was something your nan always said and I never questioned it. Story 73. Not being allowed to have a boyfriend until I get married. They'll never truly know how bad they messed me up. Story 74. Not my parents per se, but more of a family tradition that they make sure the rest of us follow. My dad's side of the family are originally from Boston and live mostly around the New England and New York area. They have this weird rule where all family by blood women in my dad's side of the family must be born or give birth in Boston. This rule was so strictly enforced that while I was pregnant with my daughter, and just a week or so from my due date, after work, a car showed up outside the museum waiting for me. The driver told me get in the car, so I did. While on the freeway, it then dawned on me to maybe ask where we were going and who sent him. He told me we were going to Boston and that it was my grandpa who organized for him to pick me up and take me there. Yeah. I then stayed at our family's vacation home in Boston until I gave birth, at a hospital, of course. We have no idea why this family tradition exists, as the last member of our family who knew why this family tradition existed was my grandpa's grandpa, but he neglected to explain the story of the tradition before his untimely passing. Story 75. On Christmas morning, we had to get dressed, have breakfast, clean up, and do the dishes before we could open presents, but only one present at a time. Let's say I go get a present for someone. They open it. Then they pick a present for someone else, and they'd get to open their present, and so on. BTW, I was the youngest of 4 kids, plus Grandma was often staying with us for the holiday. As you can imagine, note, opening presents takes a long time. My anxiety was through the roof, although we each only had a few presents, 2 or 3, besides the socks and underwear presents. But there were a lot of us. Then, before we could open up the toy or game to play it, we had to clean up the wrapping paper, etc. Then any of us 3 girls might be recruited to help out in the kitchen, making food for later. My 2 sisters were a lot older than me, 5.5, 7 years older. My brother would be excused because he was a boy. It's really a wonder that I actually looked forward to Christmas. And no, I didn't carry on that tradition with my kids. I actually like my kids being kids. At that age, OC. Answer. One of my favorite memories was when my kiddo was 3. We always let him open one gift on Christmas Eve, and he happened to pick the Mousetrap board game. Christmas morning, he comes straight out of his room over to the table I still had the game set up at, and just demanded to play with me. He didn't care that it was time to open all his other gifts. He just really wanted to play Mousetrap. It wasn't even on his Christmas list. It was just a game my dad sent for Christmas because he thought kiddo would like it. He did. He loved it so much. In fact, even now, 7 years later, we still occasionally pull it out to play it together. It's a little worse for wear, but he gets so much joy out of capturing that mouse. Lol. Story 76. Bring home the paper bag and or plastic sandwich bags from school lunch to be used again the next day. Plastic ones were washed and dried overnight. Story 77. My mom forbade me from having a jean jacket in ninth grade in 1983. I now own several. I'm sure each time I buy one, it's because my mom didn't let me have one. Story 78. Not a rule per se, but takedown, substances abuse, and intimacy assault were normal dinner table conversation topics in my house. My mom was a social worker and my dad a prosecutor. Normal people don't discuss that stuff. Story 79. I wasn't allowed in the house when nobody was home, which means in Minnesota winter I'd have to sit outside for a few hours until someone got home. I had to pick by hand any of the things in the carpet out by hand. Think white sock, link, etc. Why not use a vacuum? I was allowed 2 minutes to shower twice a week. Not 2 minutes of water, 2 minutes total time. I could only do it when he was home, and he was willing to time it. I just took baths in the lake nearby. Only allowed to eat dinner, so I stole food or ate out of dumpsters. After all that, and about 6 years went by after being homeless or living with friends, I moved back to try and reconnect, and I was allowed to stay in a shack with no heat, aquater, or bathroom. I wasn't allowed in the house or to use the shower ever. And then they randomly decided I wasn't allowed any of their food. 30-minute drive with no car. So I just left and never talked with them again. Story 80. Wouldn't call it bizarre really, but I wasn't allowed to play outside with my friends as a kid if it was a school night, even if I had already done all my homework. At the time, I just accepted it, even though I used to see my friends out riding their bikes, playing basketball, etc. through my window. Didn't really think much of it until I got older and looked back on it. Still don't know why that was a rule. I always did well in school and never got into any real trouble. In my opinion, there was no good reason for it. Story 81. Couldn't go on dates, BC. What if a boy tries something? But hanging out at their houses was perfectly fine. Story 82. I wasn't allowed to sit on the couch until I was 16. Mom wanted to keep it nice and didn't want any kids rooting on it. I used to go sit on it when she wasn't home. Yeah, I lived dangerously. Story 83. My dad has borderline personality disorder and is a clinically diagnosed narcissist. There were so many bizarre rules growing up, I can't even remember half of them, and they changed according to his moods. It wasn't fun. The TV was a big one. We absolutely had to have the volume on 10. He would walk past and check often, and if it wasn't, we got yelled at, or he turned it down so low we couldn't hear it. Also would just randomly declare tonight is TV free for no reason. Story 84. When I got my license at 16, my mother told me that just cause I had my license didn't mean I would be driving every day. I could drive to school 3 days a week and then had to ride the bus the other 2 because she paid for the bus through her taxes. I could pick the days I could drive, though. I was so embarrassed because none of my other friends had this rule, so they always asked why the hell I was still riding the bus when I had a car and could drive. When my oldest son got his license, she thought I was going to follow in her footsteps and enforce the rules she imposed on me. I asked her that why would I not let him drive? He earned the right to drive. He was a good kid. He hasn't done anything wrong to prove to me otherwise. She told me he doesn't need to be driving every day, and the bus is perfectly good transportation. This is just one of hundreds of rules my controlling mother imposed on me. Give me a little freedom, but still let me know she was in full control of me. She never likes to see someone with too much independence. Ugh. Story 85. We weren't allowed to cry when we were hurt unless we were bleeding. As an adult, it's almost impossible for me to cry now. Story 86. I was explicitly not allowed to bring books to the dinner table or into the shower. In my mother's defense, I would read constantly if allowed. The shower rule was instituted after I started bringing a small book inside a page protector into the shower, and then taking ridiculously long showers because I was reading. Story 87. I couldn't paint or decorate my bedroom because of resale value. My parents acted like we were going to move at any given time. They moved into their third house on my 21st birthday. We were not housing insecure. They're still in that house 23 years later. Story 88. Luckily, not my parents, my step-grandma. Whenever we went on family vacations, my step-siblings and I never wanted to share a room with step-grandma. Step-grandma believed we needed to go to sleep at 9:30, even though we were 11, 16, and 20 and on vacation. Keep in mind that of us go to bed at 9:30, even on a school night. There was one trip we went on when I took my phone out after she went to bed, and when she got up to go to the bathroom at like 12 a.m., she literally went, "Aha," at me and took my phone away. Again, I was 19 and we were on vacation. But she doesn't speak much English, so I didn't know what to tell her and just gave up and went to sleep. Then we went to Vegas for New Year's that winter, and again, we're all in a room with step-grandma. I was 20, so I couldn't go do the adult stuff yet with my dad, stepmom, cousins, etc. So I stayed in the hotel after dinner with my younger siblings and step-grandparents. We planned to stay up watching movies and then watch the fireworks at midnight, which we'll have a perfect view of from our room. But then, at 9:30, step-grandma comes over and says it's time for bed and to put everything away. She really expected a 20-year-old to go to bed at 9:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve. This time we don't go along with it, and as soon as she falls asleep, we take all our stuff back, go to the connected room. We had a suite, watch movies, and watch the fireworks, and have fun. We tell my dad and stepmom the next day, and they get genuinely pissed at step-grandma, so at least we had someone on our side. XD. Story 89. You were morally bankrupt if you slept in for any reason. And by sleeping in, I mean sleeping past 7 a.m. on a Sunday. Didn't matter how late you were doing homework or working the night before. Didn't matter if you were sick. If you slept in, you were a reprehensible, disgusting human being who was wasting your whole life laying around in bed. 1. It turns out I have POTS, so fudge my parents. I was so goddamned exhausted all the time. 2. My mother had the audacity to wake me up early at 7:30 on a Saturday after I'd moved out. She called me at 7:30 a.m. to ask me if I'd seen a minor text that applied to an event that was being held the next day. I had, and she knew I had read receipts on. I knew she was just doing it to be a jerk about my parents' particular beliefs on sleeping, so I cut her a new one over the phone. To her credit, she hasn't done it since. Story 90. I wasn't allowed to sleep inside the house. I could be inside until like 8 or 9 p.m. Then my dad and stepmom would lock me out. I slept in a camper in the yard. On weekends and days I wasn't at school, I was working outside from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., digging trenches or pulling weeds. At noon, I would have a sandwich and water. This was during high school. Before that, I was allowed to sleep inside, but only on the floor. I was the oldest of 4, so I didn't know. It was always brushed off as strict parents whenever I mentioned it to anyone, but my siblings never had to do it. Story 91. No singing at the dinner table. My parents were amazing and super permissive, so I have no clue where or why other than my sister and I must have been annoying as heck. Story 92. We weren't allowed to read Newsweek before she examined it first, in case Newsweek contained something objectionable like a woman in a bikini. Story 93. My parents just kicked us out after they woke up in the morning and told us to be back around 10. That's when my dad left for work. I always thought this was so he could sleep since he worked nights. While that was probably true, he would just be hanging out in the living with my mom most of the day. My rents didn't rent much. Story 94. Don't open multiple boxes of cereal at the same time. Please, all the cereal is going to be consumed. Story 95. Also, my mom always flipped out when she came home from work and I was taking a nap. To her credit, I did stay up way too late and sucked at functioning in the morning. But I was always so tired no matter what. Turns out I'm anemic, but lol. Story 96. No standing in the kitchen if the microwave was on. The radiation will totally cause our future children to have birth defects. Story 97. My mom didn't want to teach me how to care for my hair, so she insisted that I wear it short. So I did, until I was in my 20s. Like, we went to a barber and I was called Butch before I understood the word. Story 98. We had one drink cup by the kitchen sink. Thirsty, use that cup and put it back for other family members. Would wash it in the dishwasher every 2 days or so. Story 99. An unspoken rule, but no inserting taking out plugs if dad was in bed or relaxing. Apparently, he could hear them going into, and it infuriated him. No one else could hear them from another room, and sometimes he'd randomly accuse us. IDK if he was hearing something else and mistaking it for plugs, but yeah, none of us speak to him anymore. Story 100. My parents never let me go out because I can see my friends at school. Then they wondered why I had no friends, LOL. Story 101. Understand that my dad is a control freak, and my mom was weirdly into healthy living. So the number of bizarre rules we had was LOM. Here are some. We couldn't listen to anything other than classical music because rock and roll would somehow stunt our minds. I remember my mom would sometimes listen to forbidden music in the afternoons, but as soon as she heard my dad's car in the driveway, she would change the channel. In high school, my granny got us all boom boxes, and that rule went straight out the window. We didn't have a TV. When I was 9, we were watching a documentary about King Tut and our TV died. Before that, we were only allowed to watch PBS. My parents decided not to replace the TV, and we weren't allowed to watch TV at our friends' houses either. When they got divorced, the first thing both of them did was get a TV and then fight a war of who had the better cable package to lure their children to visit. No sleeping in on weekends. In fact, my dad would drag us out of bed at 6 a.m. to do chores around the yard and house. I had severe insomnia from stress starting at 9. I began to sleep in school. I wasn't allowed to cut my hair, my dad's rule. When I was in 6th grade, my mom gave in and let me cut my hair. It was below shoulder length. My dad refused to talk to us for months. I wasn't allowed to get a driver's license until my sophomore year at college. I had to walk everywhere, including to work. My college was in the middle of nowhere. I lost the freshman 15. I used to walk 2 hours each way once a week to get my comics. Dedication. We had to eat healthy, cheap breakfast cereal. Think Cheerios, but generic ones that tasted like cardboard, with no sugar, and we could only eat whole wheat bread. My brother is allergic to milk, so the only brand we could eat tasted like jerk. You had to finish everything on your plate, and you didn't get to serve yourself. My parents once tried force-feeding me creamed corn. I projectile vomited it all over them. Karma. We didn't get to pick our clothes. My mom had the worst taste in clothes, and we're talking about the 70s and 80s. There was a lot of bad taste going around. I dislike pink. My mom knew that. One Christmas, she and my aunt got me an entire wardrobe in bubblegum pink. Those were the only gifts I got. I was forced to wear them. I cried on Christmas and practically every day for a year. That's all I can think of now. But childhood was a stressful time for me. Thank the gods I grew up and got out. Story 102. Only one activity per weekend. If we spent that night at a friend's house on Friday, we couldn't do anything with that friend, or any other friend on Saturday or Sunday. The rest of the weekend belonged to the family. Story 103. Grew up on a farm, so manual labor was a fact of daily life, but it wasn't enough. Starting at age 10, in addition to attending school and doing my livestock chores on the farm after school, I had to have a job.